As talked about previously in class, water and water management at a site is one of the most important things you can look at in permacultural design. How are you going to manage water on the site and conserve it? Let's take a little diversion from the main topic just to discuss water in general. One researcher's findings caught my attention a while back in 2004. Masaru Emoto published a book called The Hidden Messages in Water, and it was a New York Times bestseller. He's a Japanese businessman and author and actually just pseudoscientist, but his idea was that human consciousness could affect water, and in this case that you're looking at, in how the crystallization of water occurs under different stages of pollution and consciousness. So you're looking at a picture of water crystals that have formed from different types of water. You look in the upper left, spring water has a nice symmetrical look. And then look in the very middle center, you've got more polluted water from certain lake, Guaco Lake, in the center of Japan, and you don't see a nice crystalline symmetrical form. Similar to Yodo River, which is highly polluted, going through some of the major cities in Japan, and the fountain in France, not in Japan at all, but that is pretty dirty water too. So his idea is in this case, chemicals will affect the crystallization of water, but he also published in his book findings that looked similar to this, but instead of being polluted in clean water, it was water that was flash frozen but exposed to human emotions. When they were exposed to love and peace, harmony, the crystals formed very symmetrically and beautifully, and when they were exposed to angry, destructive thoughts and feelings, the flash frozen water did not freeze into those nice symmetrical crystalline structures. So his takeaway was that our consciousness affects the actual physical structure of water. And he didn't do any large-scale studies with this. It was more of an installation art than science, but it was an interesting idea, and I'm sure at some level humans, the consciousness and our intent can affect the physical things around us. All right, that's a fun diversion. Now let's get into some of the reasons why we should try to conserve more water and consider it more carefully in our permaculture designs. These days, around these parts in Southern California, almost everyone knows that we have a water shortage. There's all kinds of things that take a lot of water, not just what we drink, but landscaping is a really big use of water. So is our plumbing system for flushing water away in our toilets. Water is used to make plastic water bottles. 26 liters of water is needed to make 1 liter water bottle. Microchips in computers take lots of water to produce. There's water scarcity all over the world. What I like to say, at least in California and the American West, is that we're really not in a drought. We're just in an overconsumption of water. We use too much water. And there are lots of reasons to conserve water. And one of them is to use less water as much as possible. Where is most of the water used by United States homes and dwellings, households? It's mostly used outdoors. Over half is used in our landscaping. In certain areas, like in the areas of Santa Barbara, their Montecito area, almost 80% of the water used on site is for landscaping. That's mostly because there's a larger plot size compared to the home size in those areas. They have big yards, in other words. Toilets use some of the water, washing clothes, drinking water, dishes, leaks, etc. But toilets and shower and the clothes washer and the outdoors make up almost 80% of the water use on site. So we have a lot of area where we can really conserve and reduce use of water. A lot of potential for conservation on our properties. A quick little look at the hydrological cycle or water cycle. You all have been probably familiar with this for a long time. But water cycles through the soil, water bodies, the atmosphere, and back down. And ideally, you have a lot of infiltration from precipitation. It soaks into the soil, percolates down, hydrates and irrigates roots and crops, and some percolates down into the groundwater as well and comes up in springs. A low amount of erosion would be ideal too, but the cycling of water and having it go around and around and being utilized in all aspects of the ecosystem is ideal. Just some local statistics. We see that rainfall on average is 18.25 inches in Santa Barbara from the years 1868 to 2006. So that's a long period of time, and you can see in there, often there's high years and there's low years. So it is very normal for us to have a few years that are way below average or partially below average, and then years that are above average and some extremely high above average. So that's the normal cycle of waterfall. So what we want to do with our water conservation techniques and our designs is to plan for both of these types of years. And there's a bunch of different ways to do that. One of the simplest things I'll mention now is, of course, capturing rainwater in something like a tank or a rainwater barrel, or in the soil. When you have really thick, rich soils, they can hold water for a long time, and in the plants themselves too. So we're going to look at a bunch of different techniques, how permaculture designers approach water management and conservation on site. One of the key ways to conserve water is slowing the flow of water on a site. You see in the above left picture, the diagram is showing a small watershed, and that's showing you if the area is not very highly vegetated and you don't have any water catchment areas, the place where the water comes from, the source, to the sink is pretty straight. So in this diagram, you'll have water hitting the top part and quickly flowing into the valleys and creeks and running out. And if it goes that fast and there's not a lot of vegetation and it's a pretty straight shot, you're going to get high erosion, a loss of topsoil and sediment. In the lower diagram, so these are idealized extremes, of course, to illustrate a point. The lower left diagram is showing you in permaculture design, try to plan so that when your water hits your site, like on the top of this hill, this little cutaway diagram, the top part is your source. And you can see in that little box in the upper left part of that lower diagram, it's showing you from the source to the sink is not a very straight path, it's convoluted. Water comes down from the source, stops and is held in some kind of basin or tank or pond, and then the overflow of that slowly, not in a very steep slope, but slowly runs down to the next little holding tank, and so on, zigzagging and back and forth until it gets all the way to the bottom. And you're seeing that illustrated in the lower diagram where you see ponds. So the highest point is the furthest left part on that diagram in both the upper and lower diagrams. The furthest left, kind of right against the edge of the slide. Water hits there, that's the highest point, and whatever water hits there, with your earthwork, so you slope the land, build swales and canals and things to slowly move that water towards that first little tank or pond. When that fills up and there's overflow, it spills out into another little channel, which slowly moves it down to the next pond, and other water can enter there from other areas, and it slowly zigzags and moves over this whole site. So the water takes a long time and soaking in all the way, providing irrigation for plants all along the way, not ever being fast enough in the movement of the water in those channels to go to pick up sediment. Water has to move a certain speed to start to pick up erosive force and pick up sediment and carry it away. So if it's a 2% or under slope, that is, the water will move too slowly to pick up sediment. So you're having just gentle water moving down and you're not getting loss of topsoil. So that's the whole idea. Slow the flow of water on the site. Catch it. They say seize the high ground. Catch the water at the highest spot and store it as high or as close to that high spot as possible, and use it numerous times as it moves down through the property before it exits. Create as complex a path as possible from source to sink. Store water high on the landscape if you can. Then it has the most potential to be used below. Here's a picture of one of the original configurations of ponds on a site at Zaytuna Farm in Australia, where Bill Mollison first set out his idea for catching the water at the high point and moving it into a series of ponds that slow the water down and catch it and let it infiltrate. So all of these ponds that you're seeing in this black and white photo, which is from like the 1970s, those are all joined. They're all part of the same water system. Water is entering the property on the upper left, and it slowly snakes its way down through these ponds. Each, when they reach their overflow, spill out into another channel, which slowly moves down to the next pond. So the most complex path possible, using the water in many ways before it leaves the site. And Zaytuna is still a big permaculture site. Jeff Lawton, the guy who taught me permaculture, directs that property, and if you want to watch that YouTube there, it's kind of fun just to hear his accent. Another way of saying these things is increasing the residency time of water in our designs. Have water stay on site for a while. Most of our municipal systems is to get water quickly away from the home, quickly away down the street, quickly into the stormwater runoff and down to the river or creek or ocean. Get it away. We want to get it away from human habitations as fast as possible. That makes some sense. We don't want water sitting against our homes and causing rotting, but it's overdone. We're losing, we have so much rainfall that comes down, it all goes right into the ocean. And then we cry, oh no, we're in a water shortage, we have a drought. Be careful, conserve, turn the water off while you're brushing your teeth. So to me, some of those things like turning the water off when you're brushing your teeth, either I'm just rebellious by nature, or I'm smart enough to think that's kind of a low-tier attack on water conservation. There's so many other things we could do that would save so much more water. And one of them is divert stormwater or precipitation water into holding tanks, into ponds, or into swales, into places where it will stop and sit and soak in, where we can utilize it, and maybe utilize it, if it's in a tank, even in our plumbing. As I said in the last slide, collect water as high as possible on the site and store it there, and use it high up, and then you have it come down the site, use a little bit more, etc. Most efficient water storage is in the ground. So building soil, increasing soil organic matter, and the richness of your topsoil will be the simplest, and that's why it's efficient, but it's the simplest way to store water. It'll hold on to water for a longer period of time. You have to irrigate less. And water tends to move perpendicular to the contour of the land. It wants to go down perpendicular to the slope of the land. So you build structures like ponds and tanks and swales. Remember, swales are level. So they catch water, they slow the water down, they spread it out and hold it until it can sink in, rather than shunting it away into the ocean. Some other water management strategies on the site. I'll talk about each of these. Swales, gabions, rainwater harvesting systems, stormwater catchment, gray water use, and then Watson's Wick is an interesting methodology that can be used, and Keyline Design as well. Let's talk about each of those next. Swales. So I've mentioned that and I've described it a little bit. Here's another description of it. If you have a slope, you will dig a ditch on the upper side on contour. So this is a level ditch wrapping around a hillside, and the soil that was in that ditch that you dug, put it on the lower side. So as rainwater hits that area, that's just a diagram showing you two swales, consecutive swales on a slope. The rainwater that hits in between the upper swale and the lower swale will run down, and hopefully not too fast, but even if it does cause some erosion, it runs into the ditch of that swale and catches the water and lets the water soak in. And one good thing to do is put mulch in that ditch too, so it slows down the water and holds it and lets it sink in. And this swale series of swales can be used over and over on a slope. You can have a number of swales that keep the rainwater that hits it from picking up too much speed before it gets to the next swale. And what you have is building back up of soil. that has been depleted by poor management and erosion. Gabions are simply rock cages that can be stacked up and used to make a retaining wall. They're nice and porous too, meaning water that comes down the slope on top can filter down in the soil and it can come out between the rocks, so that the wall is not so solid that it holds so much water back that it can cause too much hydraulic pressure behind the wall. If a wall like this did not have ways for the water on the upslope part to get through the wall, it would cause hydraulic fail. The wall would be pushed over slowly. So these gabions are maybe not the most attractive for landscaping, but for on larger scale types of water management. They slow the water down, they catch the sediment, and they let it sink a little, and they are a good alternative to a retaining wall. A couple more images of gabions. The upper left are gabions used in a more decorative manner as a bench in a garden, not really holding back water or anything, or soil. The lower right is a massive municipal use of gabions for a creek running under a road to decrease erosion as that water gets channelized and narrowed to go underneath the road. These are some very simple gabion-like structures, rock walls built in the desert, and you can see how they have caught sediment and moisture and held on to it, forming steps down this otherwise very dry habitat in the Middle East. And you can see where the vegetation is now tending to grow better in that richer sediment soils, and there's more moisture, so you see the green right there in the valley. And this again is kind of a natural way that soils move and are held on a lot of sites, but overgrazing and deforesting has caused a lot of soil erosion and gullying to form. So this kind of restores the natural sediment holding and moisture holding properties of valleys. Sometimes if your slope is too steep even for swales, you can do this other method called net and pan, which is like a little half circle, semicircle shape on the lower side of trees that are placed equidistantly along a very steep slope. A swale on a very steep erodible slope probably would fail. You get water moving into it and then it would bust out the swale, or the soil would just be too unstable to hold all that water in. These small ones can be a good way to start, and hardier trees that are planted that can handle that type of poor soil, erodible soil, and unstable soils that root very deeply and quickly can help hold it in. And these little half semicircle berms around the lower side can help keep some of the soil and water there until they get established. Let's get back to our list. Rainwater harvesting. These pictures are from the upper two are from Brad Lancaster's book on rainwater harvesting, which is a great set of books. There's two. On the upper left picture, you're seeing just basically topography is the problem. You've got the trees, and the trees higher up on mounds and the paths lower. So when water hits that system, it runs down into the kind of below the trees and into the little valleys there, and causes erosion, and that's a problem. If you look at the upper right picture, you've got your path raised up, and so you have more sediment being kept and not flowing off of the site. So, and you have soil buildup, and the trees themselves are getting more hydrated, and you're not getting as much erosion. If you want to determine how much water you can collect off of a roof, this is just an example of a very typical small bungalow home, 30 by 40 foot bungalow, 1,200 feet of 1,200 square feet of surface area for catchment of water from the roof. If you've got 18.25 inches on average per year of rain in Santa Barbara, you times the 18.25 inches divided by 12 inches per foot, and it's about 1.5 feet of rain per year. And if you times that by the square footage of the roof, is the catchment area, that house's roof can theoretically collect 13,000 gallons of water a year. Now, to hold all that water, you'd need another house almost the same size as a water tank, but it just shows you how much water can potentially be conserved, stored, and used on the site that hits that house. The typical house of this size would, in Santa Barbara with this kind of rainfall, would catch and hold a very small fraction of that. And then we would be worried about drought, and we'd have to buy back water from the water companies to bring back to our home for irrigation, which is 50% of the water we buy is for irrigation outside in the landscaping. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense. There are simpler ways to do this. That is to catch the water you need and use it and keep it on site. Here are very simple ways. These rain barrels that catch water off of your downspout. That's one way to do it. Now these barrels are going to hold 30 to 60 gallons. It's not going to last you long, maybe 1 or 2 waterings, but it's something. It's something better than nothing, and it also creates a lot of awareness about using the water that comes to the site and storing it. Cisterns used to be popular all over the United States, especially in agricultural areas. It would be buried underneath the house, and they're large-scale tanks that can hold water that comes to the site. They can be made of plastic, metal, concrete, or ferro cement. They can be underground or above ground, but they're all great ideas for water storage, water catchment of rainwater, and then storage for use. These pictures are from Art Ludwig's water storage book, and Art Ludwig has a lot of information on his website, Oasis Designs, that talks about water conservation and ways to do that. One way a city can do water conservation is creating curb cuts. In other words, where there's normally a street curb, we usually have water that runs down the little, side channel there and goes into the stormwater drain, then goes out to the ocean or creeks. But instead, it can be diverted right into plantings and beds by having a little cut in the curb where the water can exit and go to a little bit lower level area that has like a planting or a swale. You're seeing it on the streets, in the parkways, and in a parking lot here where the curb cut allows that storm water to flow directly to plants right there, not flow out to somewhere else where we now have to pump it back. These are very simple methods. Curb cuts are still illegal, and Santa Barbara does not want to do them, but they're gaining a little more traction. We should probably be seeing some of them happen more as we go further. Bioswales, not quite the same as a swale that I mentioned earlier. Bioswale is a term from architecture and landscape architecture, and it refers to these planted little, almost like creeks or gullies where you divert water from the road or from the overflow of irrigation down into a lower area, but bioswales have a slope to them, so it's to take water away from the area, but slowly, and the bioswales are planted, so they're good too. They're like, you see this condo complex in the lower right, and it looks like the lawn is there and the water slowly infiltrates down into where the reeds are below where there's gravel and plantings, and the water slowly moves out and downslope away from that area, but still catches a lot of water and lets it infiltrate too. Kind of a diagrammatic image of a bioswale used in a corporate setting. They're showing you what would be done, engineered underneath that swale to make it work well, usually putting in gravel, soil, sometimes a liner so the water doesn't seep into the foundation of the buildings nearby. And some images related to a gray water system. Laundry to landscape is a popular gray water system. Gray water is water that's been used mostly just from your laundry, and sometimes gray water is considered, it's considered to be gray water if it comes from your shower or your bathroom sink. But black water is water from your toilet, and that is one type of water that it's not too popular on people processing black water on their property. But gray water is great. You can take water that comes out of your laundry, filter the junk out, the lint and stuff, and as long as it's emitted, comes out of pipe in an underground mulch basin, it's completely fine. You don't need a permit. You can just set that system up. And there's a lot of water that's really good water that comes out of your washing machine that's great for landscaping, but usually it just flows away. So this is a great way to conserve water. Also, this guy in the lower left, he's just taking a shower outside, so that's even better. Normally we have water come to our home and our dwelling. We wash our hands with it, we go to the bathroom in it, we brush our teeth, we take a shower, we use it once, and then it goes away. It goes back to the water treatment plant. The water treatment plant is, it's a energy consumptive thing. It takes a lot to clean water to the potable level. And one crazy thing about our system is we clean dirty water and we clean it to the tertiary level. We make it potable. We can drink it. And then we fill our toilets with that same water. Now, I like this picture on the right side. It's like, why not take gray water at least, and fill our toilets with that used water? What we go number 1 and number 2 into certainly doesn't have to be drinking water. So that's a real inefficiency there. And here this is not like a legal system, but they've attached their sink drain to their toilet tank. So whatever goes down their sink fills the toilet tank. And so what I'm getting at is using water at least twice or more on the site before it goes away. Most homes in the United States, water is brought to that site, to that home. It's used once and then it goes away. So try to use it 2 times. If you can use it 3, all the better. Here are some benefits of using gray water, all from Art Ludwig's website, Oasis Design. And Art Ludwig is here from Santa Barbara. He's a Santa Barbaran, and he grew up here. And when he was pretty young, he started fooling around with water conservation techniques just out of necessity of not living near a water source. He moved out of his house and lived nearby, but had to do his own dishes and things, and he pretty quickly got very efficient at water use. It's like if you're backpacking or camping, you do the same thing. You only have so much water, so you're really careful with it. But he went on through time. He's a brilliant guy, and he developed all kinds of great water conservation ideas. And he actually helped the former governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger of California, develop California's gray water regulations. Of course, we've got waterless urinals too that are possible. So these urinals that do not need flushing, they don't stink, they're clean, they just don't use water. Are these common? No. Do we have any on campus at City College? We have one, and it's been broken for a few years. So I don't know why all the urinals are not like this. It's probably because to purchase them costs money, and to replace all of our water-using urinals would take time and money. And that's probably why it's not quite the priority yet, but it's possible. These should be regulated to be implemented into all new buildings and having no water-using urinals at all. Back to the question, why do we poop in our clean water supply? No idea. It is interesting, too, that the plumbing union has allowed the waterless urinals to be put into places where there are existing water urinals. So, but the plumbing union, when these regulations are developed about waterless urinals, it said that the pipes for the water to the urinal still had to be put into the wall all the way up to where the water-using urinal would be placed. So if you're going to put a waterless urinal in and you're building a new building, you have to still have all the plumbing for water to come to that urinal, even though they're capped off and you're not using it. And that's because the plumbing union that was a concession. They didn't want to lose all this work by starting to install all these waterless urinals. So that's interesting, kind of political side point. Composting toilets are great. There's nothing smelly and dirty or unsterile about them. Of course, I'm biased, so I think they're a great idea. They're not legal in the Santa Barbara County. They are in some counties in California and other parts of the United States, but not here. But it's basically where you go to the bathroom in some kind of closed container like a bucket or a nice looking regular toilet, and then that material, you add sawdust to it, you add carbon, and you take that and compost it in a anaerobic composting situation. And after it's composted for a few months, it can then be put into a regular compost pile, and you can use it on fruit trees, things like that maybe aren't vegetables, and it's completely fine. Oh, there's no pathogens left at that point. But regulations are slow to change, and people are still, of course, wary of being our poop being anywhere near us or our food source. But this book you're seeing in the upper right, the Human Manure Handbook, is filled with tons of interesting research on how safe and actually helpful these composting toilets can be to detoxifying our waste and making it an asset, something you can use. The Watson Wick is a type of wastewater treatment. And it was created by Tom Watson. It uses a lot of pumice. So pumice is a type of volcanic stone that has tons of little pores and holes, kind of like lava rock. So lots of surface area where microbes can live and filter out the waste. So this is a type of system where your wastewater from your toilet would go into it, and using microorganisms, all of the waste is decomposed and made into clean, filtered water at the outflow of this wick. So we have the technology, actually, to create these systems that can clean black water on site over a small period of time in a small area, and take black water, it comes out of your toilet, and turns it into drinking water. But we have these huge municipal infrastructure systems that do that for us. But it's also possible to do it on site in a much more sustainable way. So we have those ideas and technologies. They're just not developed because they're considered to be distasteful and unsafe. And that's kept a lot of people from using these types of efficient water conserving designs. So just so you know, it's not Mike just making up a bunch of stuff. This is an actual eco-village in Scotland that's been around for a long time. And they, one of the things they do is treat all their wastewater through using these big tanks of water where they have organisms that break down and purify that waste and treat the water and clean it out until it's pure enough to return to the local water table. Don't forget to check out Art Ludwig's descriptions of the Watson Wick and of composting toilets too. There's just a lot of good information on that oasisdesign.net site. So another technique of water conservation is Keyline Design. What is Keyline Design? Well, one of the Keyline designers that I listened to speak once said, rain is income for a farmer. You have rain that comes down, it makes your crops grow, you sell the crops. It's an important thing to conserve. And groundwater is your bank account. So it's the water that's stored that you can use later. So two forms of water and two analogies: rain as income and groundwater as savings. Think of it that way. So the goal is to increase the residency time of water on your site, increase the bank account by catching that income, catching that rain. Soil is key to slowing down the water on your site. Healthy soil, healthy vegetation. Healthy soil can hold 6 to 10 times its weight in water compared to unhealthy soil. And this is a Keyline Plow, Yeoman's Keyline Plow, a type of plow that I mentioned earlier to you that does not invert the soil, so it doesn't turn the soil up and over, but just cuts into it to create more channels for water to infiltrate into the soil, or fertilizer to be put in, or seeds, instead of the type of plow that turns over the soil and creates soil microbial disturbance and soil erosion and water loss too. It's Yeoman's Plow. A keyline plow can be used in a number of ways, and you start by a shallow, this is showing you 6 centimeter run through of that keyline plow through the site, as you saw in the previous slides. Maybe the soil is just so hard and dead and compact you can't even get your keyline plow in, but run it through at 6 centimeters and then maybe a few months later or a couple years later, the roots of the plants that have grown, showing you on that picture on the right on number 2, that they've softened the soil up. You've got some soil life coming back. Then you can run the plow through again at a deeper level, because now it's softer, it can get in there deeper, and do that again and again until you get a very deep, rich topsoil. And in between, you're planting plants in there like legumes and things that can help build the soil and add organic matter, and whose roots grow and die and loosen the soil and enrich it. This is looking from the top down on a hillside, a ridge, and you can see the black contour lines showing you that ridge. The red lines are the lines for your plowing with your Keyline plow. So you would be doing it, you'd start in the valley, and from the valley to the ridge, you would plow slightly downhill. So valleys in general are wetter areas. You have water that comes on the sides of the valley and flows down into the valley bottom. Using this Keyline plow, you can direct some of that moisture from the valleys out to the drier ridges by having those plow lines go slightly downhill from the valley to the ridge. So water will enter those channels created by the Keyline plow and hydrate the soil. It's not moving fast, just about a 2% slope, but also slowly move down toward the ridges. So you're equaling out. You're moving from the source, the more moist valleys, to the more dry ridges, and getting moisture and hydration and thus vegetation back to those areas. The ridges are often the place that become devegetated most quickly in the soil. Like if you have cattle out there grazing and walking around causing compaction, the ridges will die out soonest, and then you don't even have good pasture. A Keyline plow pass through there after a year or two can bring back moisture to all that area more equally, get the grasses growing back and established again, and then it's on an uphill cycle where it can start sustaining itself. The Keyline plow is not to be done that often. It's kind of like done once or twice to repair soil, and then it's on a positive trajectory, as opposed to a lot of our soils in the United States are on a negative trajectory from being overplowed with the inversion plow. It just gets them more eroded and disturbed, and they just start failing and getting worse and worse and worse. This can help turn that around. A video is linked here if you want to see some more live action of a Keyline Design system with cows and desert grasslands. Check that out if you like.